To gi or not to gi? That is the question. Over the years, I've always advocated a balanced approach when it comes to training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. By balanced, I mean one that incorporated both training with the gi, without the gi, with strikes, mixed martial arts, and with self-defense in mind. Those of you who've trained with SBGi or followed our work know that our thesis is that once you've grasped the core fundamentals of the delivery system, traveling between those four areas of the art should be even more than feasible. In other words, if your game falls apart the moment you put a gi on or the moment you take a gi off, then you have a problem with your foundation. Likewise, if after some adjustment you find yourself unable to cope on the ground when strikes are allowed, then you're missing something large as it relates to the core of the delivery system. In a recent talk with one of our top coaches, he offered up this interesting idea that the sport of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu simply hasn't evolved that deeply yet, and then when it does, things will become so nuanced that gi players will find themselves unable to adapt to no gi and vice versa. You wouldn't see the same names competing in the Mundials as you do in, say, Abu Dhabi. Instead, it would be more bifurcated. By way of example, he mentioned track and field. To paraphrase, you don't see the same medalists winning the 50 meters that you do the 100 meters, and BJJ given time would be much the same. I have to admit feeling some sense of irony in hearing this. My experience has been that the more a coach and an athlete truly understands the art, the deeper their knowledge of it, the simpler their movements and mechanics become. And though it's a bit cliche, it truly is akin to the process of a sculptor that goes through chipping away at the extraneous motions until one's left with just the core principles that make the whole thing work the way it does. The things that actually do make Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu most functional and efficient. The irony came in having this coach, who's excellent, display that exact process earlier in the day when he showed me some great fundamental principles, all of which transcend across the different arenas and environments that BJJ has played in gi, no gi, or mixed martial arts. After thinking about this some more and discussing it with another instructor, I think the analogy of track and field is flawed. In the case in track and field, the core mechanics of the delivery system, in this case running, haven't changed. What has changed is the nature of the conditioning, strategy, and tactics, and therefore the training, mostly the physical conditioning training that the athlete will go through. A good way to translate that to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu would be think about time limits. Let's say that all of a sudden the sport went to 3-minute matches. A certain type of athlete and a certain type of very aggressive game would evolve. Now change it to 30 minutes. And again, a whole different style of play would develop. The types of conditioning that the athletes had to engage in and the strategy the players adopted would adapt to the change in the time. If both types of competitions became popular, I could easily see, given enough time, two different types of athletes evolving for two different types of sports. However, the core delivery system of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu would, in my opinion, remain exactly the same. In this case, the fundamentals of escaping, holding, and submitting really wouldn't change, given that those are based on physics. Only the strategy and the conditioning methods that the players used would change. If we think in terms of evolution, the delivery system is a gene, the organism which carries that gene is the player, and the adaptation within the sports occurs according to the selection process those players are put through. If we allow all forms of leg locks back into the IBJJF, you can bet that would change the way the game is played. I think it's a bad idea. I'm solely using that as a thought experiment. Likewise, if the main mixed martial arts event switched to one 30-minute time round with no stand-ups, the referee just left it on the ground the whole time, you can also bet that would have a dramatic effect on the strategy fighters use in the cage. However, and this is my main point, the core delivery system of stand-up, kickboxing, clinch, wrestling, and the ground Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu would remain essentially exactly the same. Given that, if you train solely for the purpose of winning IBJJF tournaments, then your Jiu-Jitsu, given enough time, will surely change. The mechanics, the physics of why Jiu-Jitsu works effectively would remain the same, but your selective application of those mechanics will have adapted to the environment you're concerned about, that you're concerned winning, in this case the IBJJF tournament. Same could be said for any particular environment. However, if you focus on the core movements which make Jiu-Jitsu the efficient art that it is, you too should be able to transcend the various environments. Take off your gi, put it back on, work a little mixed martial arts, and never really skip a beat. The game will become simpler, not more complex, and as such, questions like whether or not you should train with a gi or without a gi don't really hold much weight. And that is exactly what the SBG style of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is all about.